Well, hey there, guys. How you doing? Welcome back to my YouTube channel. Thanks for joining me here today. So, I wanted to talk about this recent congressional UAP transparency and whistleblower protection hearing. It kind of had a long name that took place a couple days ago, early September, as of this recording. I really do feel like we're making progress here. Bringing whistleblowers and firsthand witnesses forward. We had a lot more specific information, I felt, than in some of the previous hearings. And if you're familiar with my YouTube channel, and my platform here, I've been going to hearings like this since the citizen hearing of 2013 at the National Press Club in DC. Of course, that was a mock hearing because at the time, they couldn't get any sitting senators or congressmen or women to attend the citizen hearing, which was 5 days long, 8 hours a day, about 40 witnesses from all types of UFO, UAP experience, from Rendlesham Forest to pilots to some of the missile control launch officers, Bob Salas and Dave Schindele and others. It was quite an impressive event, but at the time they could not get any sitting Congress people or senators to attend because they were told when they asked people to these, congressional representatives to attend the hearing, they were told that they thought it would damage their career prospects or something like this, which we've heard many times. So this is why they hired retired congressmen and women and one senator, Mike Gravel from Alaska at the time, who since passed on, to depose some of these witnesses to get them to share their stories. It was not technically under oath because they weren't sitting senators or Congress people, but we had this testimony for 5 days and they made a bunch of videos about it. So I think it's a progress now that we actually have a committee, a subcommittee for UAP transparency and whistleblower protection that's actually taking place in Congress from sitting congressional men and women who are actually serving at this time. And they do really genuinely seem like Burlison, Luna and others, Burlison, and some of the other representatives there, they really do seem like they want to get to the bottom of this, because if you noticed in the hearing, especially from witness Borland, every time they asked questions about specific evidence, about recovered craft and materials used in recovered craft, they would get this response from Borland, for example, that he could only talk about it in a SCIF, as a secure compartmentalized information facility. And that they were really getting to some real explosive material there, because a couple times he said that he couldn't talk about it out of a SCIF, especially towards the end of the hearing. It really built momentum as the hearing went along. It was almost like 3 hours long or something like this. It did build momentum, and towards the end he kept saying, I can only talk about this in a SCIF because I've been part of these special access programs, and he said it was an agency-wide special access program. And then he even said something very curious. He said, I'm not even sure you're allowed to hear it, in response to the question of whether there is evidence of extraterrestrial craft, and whether that object that they showed that video of the Hellfire missile hitting some UAP over an ocean in the Mideast, what he thought that was. He said he couldn't talk about it. So he obviously knew a lot, and I felt that a lot of the witnesses, Nuccetelli, Wiggins, and the others, one of whom, Wiggins, is still serving in the Navy. I mean, they were really getting to the heart of some very important sightings. I thought from Nuccetelli, it was just very interesting that these sightings have continued over Vandenberg missile test range. You remember we heard from retired Colonel Bob Jacobs. Over the years, many years ago, he talked about this, of that site, they were recording film of these test missile launches. They had, remember that object that came around one of the launches that they were, they filmed it and they saw it later, of an object coming around and neutralizing the warhead, the dummy warhead, firing little laser type beams into it. You remember that one? And then even apparent civilian astronaut Ken Johnson, who spoke at one of the conferences, the Open Minds UFO conference in Scottsdale, I believe it was in 2015. We haven't heard much from him since. He talked about these overflights over Vandenberg missile test range. So we had Nuccetelli talking about seeing flying squares over the test range, huge flying squares, and then triangular craft. So we had a lot of specific information, and you could see these witnesses were quite agitated by what they had seen, and especially afterwards, and this is the important point, they're told not to talk about it, that this could be bad for your career, right? That this is not something you want to mention again. And these folks really seem to be determined to tell the rest of us, what they've seen, just out of a feeling of, openness and transparency and things that make democratic republics work as free flow of information. They were never told what these objects were, but they were just told not to talk about it. So it's just really interesting that over all these missile test ranges, obviously in other countries as well, former Soviet Union, 1982, Bielokorovich area, of overflights of missile test ranges, of nuclear missile facilities in various countries, the missiles being deactivated, like at Maelstrom or Minot, like Dave Shindeli talked about, which we've discussed on this channel in his book, It Never Happened, which he was told later by his supervisor about the event. And also the fact that this happened in the USSR in the past in 1982. And in that case, the missile sequences were initiated after several hours of an object or objects flying over this site in what's now Ukraine. And we've talked about that. I mentioned that in my book, Black Swan Ghost, talking to Dr. Richard Hoover, who was entertaining the former head of the Kurchatov Institute once in the U.S., Muradin Kamakov, who talked about that incident. This is someone who would have been in charge of all the nuclear facilities in the former Soviet Union, who mentioned this to Richard Hoover over, according to Richard, pickles and vodka, about this incident in 82 over what's now the Ukraine, this missile base, having a huge object over it. Now, we heard more information about this in the hearing. Apparently, George Knapp talked about it, and George Knapp, I thought, did really an excellent job representing investigative journalism in this country. I mean, he's so knowledgeable about the topic. He's been involved for so long. He gave it a lot of credibility. He talked about this object. I hadn't heard this before, about it splitting up into two and then rejoining at 4 hours. And then eventually the missile launch sequences are activated. These guys in the Soviet, Union, pulling their hair out. The missiles are about to launch at us, the U.S., and then they stop at the last minute. Anyway, this is just such an important topic, and yet we hear from these witnesses over and over again. There's this huge stigma, against talking about it. It won't be good for your career. It never happened. So you wonder kind of how much of our reality is being covered up by these national security orders, these NDAs, witnesses. I am sure there's plenty more witnesses. I've talked to some, I've mentioned this on my channel, in the past, who don't want to come forward because of fear of retaliation by the federal government against them. They've signed NDAs. Several people who either handled this alleged extraterrestrial material or wherever it's actually, whoever, it's not from here. I think we can ascertain that, but wherever it actually is from, other engineers who've worked for Fortune 500 companies here in the US who've been asked to look at these materials. They had firsthand knowledge. One of them told me of a project within the company to look at these extraterrestrial metals and so forth. So this is really a huge topic, and I don't see how we're going to really advance as a society until we open up about this and talk about what's going on here. Yes, within the framework of some sort of national, security context. We don't just want to give away all the secrets of how this worked. But I mean, this came up over and over again in the hearing. You remember a couple of years ago, I got to go visit Bigelow Aerospace, and we were told, it was part of the SSC IRVA meetings in Vegas. They scheduled a meeting at Bigelow Aerospace, and I asked one of our tour guides about this facility that was mentioned in the New York Times article from 2017. This apparent alleged airtight facility that was designed to house extraterrestrial materials, biologics, as it's now called, even entire craft. I mean, George Knapp said that James Lukatsky has said publicly that there was a craft that was scheduled to go to this facility that was supposed to be transferred from, I guess, Lockheed Martin to this facility, the Bigelow facility we visited. Anyway, I asked our tour guides about this, and they would not answer the question seriously. But from this hearing, we got more information. Of course, Lukatsky, you've heard him say, when asked about it, that he won't talk about it because he signed an NDA and it's classified information, and that he wouldn't talk about it even if subpoenaed by Congress. I remember Lukatsky saying this, if I'm not mistaken. So, I mean, this is obviously a very serious subject. It has to do with who else is with us in this universe. Are we alone? Technology. Does it just seem to me that our technology has been held back in some ways over the last 100 years? Because, I talk to these experts and these people who have handled these materials, who've seen the facilities, and I get the feeling there's a lot of technical know-how out there that's restricted to black budget programs. And that's what this hearing moved in that direction, to find out more about this. Now, this UAP transparency subcommittee doesn't have subpoena power, as we heard this discussion towards the end of the hearing. And I encourage you to listen to the whole thing because it kind of built momentum as it went along. They don't have direct subpoena power. It has to come through the UAP task force. So they can't get information from hostile witnesses, people who don't want to talk about it. But, this is not just about UFOs and extraterrestrials and other life forms that we'll probably discover are around us. This has to do with accountability and transparency and where the money's going and what kind of society we live in here. Now, I do have to say, a big deal was made of that footage, filming this footage of an object. I guess it was over the ocean near Yemen. And then this Hellfire missile comes in, and it seems to be in infrared, so it's reversing the colors and so forth. It's seeing heat. The object seems to absorb the impact of the missile, and there were some questions from the committee. What's your reaction to this? Folks, I didn't find it convincing. I'm just going to say that doesn't look to me like a UFO or a UAP getting detonated by a Hellfire missile. What it looks like is the missile didn't detonate. There were comments online that I read from people who seem to have been around these Hellfire missiles that they use test dummy missiles with square heads just to see if they launch properly and track their targets. And it doesn't look like anything exploded. So that either means there wasn't very much there for the missile to hit since it explodes on impact, or there was no warhead in the missile. So personally, I did not find that convincing at all. It looks to me like a test of a Hellfire missile against some dummy object like a balloon or a drone, and that would explain why the object keeps going. If you look very carefully at the footage, it looks like a balloon-like object that's just sort of fluttering and spinning around. So I did not find that convincing at all. I'm happy that there's some awareness in the news about this sort of incident, but I think this is an example of groupthink, and I saw this a lot around the crop circles in years of investigating, going over to the UK and investigating the crop circles on the ground with our static electricity meters and other equipment, and seen some very strange effects. I've seen this groupthink affect the crop circle community. It often affects the UFO research community. In this case, I think that that is some ordinary object like a balloon or a drone, which is had a dummy warhead fired at it. But in any case, what I found most interesting about this hearing was witness Borland, because he talked about seeing a light lift off near a NASA hangar at Langley Air Force Base in Virginia. And he said it turned into a triangular craft. It had a glowing plasma top that looked fluid, a solid black bottom to this triangular vehicle. What I found most interesting is that he said his phone froze up. It overheated and then it froze up. It wouldn't work. This is exactly the sort of thing that we found in crop circles. We found that equipment would stop working, phones, cameras, laptops, they would just either overheat. We had that happen with a video camera once in 1997 with a video camera that was placed in near Danebury, UK, near Andover, and it was Ron Russell's camera. It overheated. I've talked about this in the past, and it was on, but it wasn't filming. It was just switched on, and he put it down, and it overheated. Solder joints had melted, had to be sent back to Sony. Devil's Den, I've shown this footage many times of Rob Spate and his friend coming in, and they say their GPS from new batteries just stops working, overheats. I've seen this happen many times. I think this is the same effect that we get around ball lightning. And if you want to see a recap of Borland's testimony, I would look at the MFMP YouTube channel. Bob Greenyer did a great job of getting an excerpt of the Borland testimony from the hearing with subtitles. Borland, so I would definitely look at that link to see exactly what Borland said. He talks about feeling that static charge, camera stops working, triangular craft, and sees the light in the middle blink a couple times, it accelerates straight upwards. I found that absolutely fascinating, and this seems totally consistent with what we know about ball lightning fusion technology, condensed charge clusters, static electricity, and so forth, exotic vacuum objects, as Ken Shoulders talked about it. And I would encourage you to look at the MFMP YouTube channel, Bob Greenyer's videos about it. I did a presentation at the SNPE 25 conference in Alamosa just recently, and here's the link, you can look at that, about ball lightning. But I think that it was just stunning to me that here we have this UFO technology. We don't know whose craft it was. Is it ours? Is it theirs? I mean, it's coming off of Langley Air Force Base. I would imagine it's our technology, but we don't know for sure. But I mean, you get the same, what are the chances here you get the same symptoms we had around crop circles, what I've argued, even our man-made crop circles, around static charges, device failure, and same effect around this triangular craft. You've heard other witnesses talk about this before around these objects. I think it's fascinating. I think it's important, and I think it shows that there's an underlying reality of ball lightning type family of objects related to charge clusters, vortex plasmas, and so forth. A type of condensed matter, a fifth state of matter beyond plasmas, related to ball lightning, orbs, earth lights, and so forth, what David Freiberger from Stanford Linear Accelerator Center in California has talked about. He calls it a kind of a magnetic vortex effect created by what he called our vortons. Whatever the actual explanation is, it seems like it's all the same family of phenomena because you get all the same sort of symptoms every time. And I think that's interesting, and that to me was the most fascinating part about it. So I would encourage you to listen to Borland's little 5-minute testimony there about seeing this triangular craft, and then you can look in your life. Have you ever seen this sort of static effect, your cameras and batteries being affected, that staticky charge around other sorts of phenomena, either natural or technological? I think it shows an underlying reality, what Ken Shoulders talked about, these different types of charge clusters, what he called exotic vacuum objects in a light state or a dark state, having their own kind of reality, being slightly decoupled from our reality, but there's this sort of energetic interface, something we see around natural ball lightning too. So in any case, I'm encouraged by the direction things are going, and I think we're going to discover some very interesting phenomena. I'm looking forward to the next hearing, and of course, I'm interested in hearing your comments. Feel free to put them in the box below. Thanks, and we'll see you next time. Take care for now, and bye.